The first time Mason saw him, it was through the gap in his bedroom curtains on a Tuesday morning when the world still felt half asleep, and something in his chest cracked open like an egg, spilling warmth into places he didn't know were cold. The man next door, tall, dark-haired, moving through sun salutations on his balcony with a grace that made Mason forget to breathe, had no idea he was being watched, had no idea that in that moment everything shifted. Mason was 19, home for the summer from his first year of university, and he had never believed in love at first sight until it reached through glass and distance and grabbed him by the throat. He stepped back from the window quickly, heart hammering against his ribs like it was trying to escape. His room suddenly felt too small, the air too thick. Through the thin wall separating his bedroom from the kitchen, he could hear his mother humming something tuneless while she prepared breakfast, could hear his father's heavy footsteps on the stairs. Normal sounds. A normal Wednesday morning in June, except nothing felt normal anymore. Mason risked another glance. The neighbor was still there, transitioning from downward dog into a standing position, rolling his shoulders back. He wore gray sweatpants and no shirt, and even from this distance, maybe 20 feet separating their buildings, Mason could see the definition of muscle, the way sunlight caught on skin that looked like it had been kissed by something holy. The man couldn't have been much older than Mason, early 20s, maybe, mid-20s at most. He had moved in 3 days ago. Mason had watched from this same window as the moving truck pulled up, as boxes and furniture were carried inside by hired movers, while the man directed traffic with easy authority. Mason's mother had noticed too, had commented over dinner that their new neighbor seemed nice, seemed young to afford a place in this neighborhood. His father had grunted noncommittally, more interested in his pot roast than in neighborhood gossip. Mason hadn't said anything, hadn't mentioned that he'd spent 2 hours that afternoon pretending to read while actually watching the man organize his new life through the window, hadn't mentioned the strange flutter in his stomach, the way his skin felt too tight out. Now, watching him exercise, Mason felt that flutter intensify into something deeper, more insistent. Want? Maybe. Or recognition. Like his body knew something his mind was still trying to catch up to. The man finished his routine, grabbing a towel from the balcony railing and wiping his face. For just a moment, he turned toward Mason's building, and Mason's breath caught. Even from here, he could see the strong line of his jaw, the fullness of his mouth. Then the man turned away, heading back inside his apartment, and Mason was left staring at an empty balcony, his heart still racing. Mason, breakfast. His mother's voice snapped him back to reality. He glanced at his reflection in the mirror above his dresser, messy brown hair, sleep still crusting the corners of his green eyes, the old university t-shirt he'd slept in wrinkled beyond redemption. He looked exactly like what he was, a 19-year-old who had just woken up. Nothing special, nothing worth noticing. The thought carried an unexpected sting. He pulled on jeans and headed downstairs, where his parents were already seated at the kitchen table. His mother, Patricia, looked up with a smile that crinkled the corners of her eyes. She was 52, but looked younger. With the same green eyes Mason had inherited and blonde hair she kept short and practical. "You look tired, sweetheart. Did you sleep okay?" "Fine," Mason said, sliding into his chair. The kitchen smelled like coffee and toast, familiar and comforting. Through the window above the sink, he could just barely see the edge of the neighbor's balcony. He forced himself to look away. His father, Richard, sat behind the newspaper, a wall of current events between him and the world. He was a tall man, solid in the way of someone who had worked construction for 30 years before moving into management. Mason had inherited his height, but not his build-wear. Richard was broad and sturdy. Mason was lean, almost lanky. "I was thinking we could drive out to the lake this weekend," Patricia said, pouring orange juice. "Make a day of it. You've been home for 2 weeks, and we've barely seen you." "I've been around," Mason protested, though even he could hear how weak it sounded. The truth was, he had been keeping to himself since returning from university. His old high school friends had scattered, some to other colleges, some to jobs in different cities. The ones who remained felt like strangers now, their conversations stuck in a past Mason had already moved beyond. Around, but not present. His mother said gently, "Is everything okay? You seem distant." Mason felt his father's attention shift, could sense him lowering the newspaper, even though he kept his eyes on his plate. This was dangerous territory. His parents had never been particularly intrusive, but they noticed things, worried, and the last thing Mason wanted was to give them reason to worry about the wrong things. "I'm fine," he said, injecting confidence into his voice. "Just adjusting to being home, I guess. University is so different. It takes a minute to switch gears." Patricia seemed satisfied with this, nodding as she buttered her toast. Richard rustled his newspaper back into position, crisis averted. But Mason's mind was already drifting back upstairs. Back to the window, back to the image of the man on the balcony moving through his exercises with such unselfconscious grace. He wondered if he'd be there again tomorrow. Wondered if this was a daily routine or a one-time thing. Wondered what his name was, what his voice sounded like, whether he was single or taken or somewhere in between. The wondering felt dangerous, intoxicating, after breakfast. Mason volunteered to take out the trash, anything to get outside, to maybe catch another glimpse. The morning had warmed considerably, summer asserting itself in the thick humidity that made his t-shirt stick to his back. He hauled the bin to the curb, deliberately slow, scanning the neighbors' windows. Nothing. No movement. No sign of life. Disappointed, he turned back toward the house. Had nearly collided with someone coming around the corner. "Whoa, sorry." Mason stumbled backward, an apology already forming on his lips. And then the words died completely, because he was staring directly into the face of the man from the balcony, up close. He was devastating. Dark hair that curled slightly at the ends, eyes so brown they were almost black, a mouth that curved into an easy, apologetic smile. He was taller than Mason by a few inches, and this close. Mason could smell something clean and cedar-like, could see the small scar cutting through his left eyebrow. "My fault," the man said, and his voice was warm, deeper than Mason had imagined. "I wasn't watching where I was going. You okay?" Mason realized he was staring, realized he hadn't spoken, realized he probably looked like an idiot. "Yeah," he managed. "Yeah, I'm fine. No problem." The man's smile widened, and Mason felt something in his chest turn over. "I'm Elliot. Just moved in next door." He gestured toward his building. Mason. His own name sounded strange in his mouth. "I live here, obviously, since you just saw me." "Yeah, smooth," he thought miserably. "Very smooth." But Elliot just laughed, a genuine sound that made his eyes crinkle at the corners. "Nice to meet you, Mason. I'd shake your hand, but..." He held up the coffee cup he was carrying, then the bag of what looked like groceries in his other hand. "Right? Yeah." Hands full. Mason wanted to die. Wanted the earth to open up and swallow him whole. Instead, he just stood there, probably smiling like a lunatic, definitely blushing. "I should let you get back to it," Elliot said, though he didn't move immediately. His eyes held Mason's for a beat longer than necessary, and Mason wondered if he was imagining the interest there, the slight curiosity. But hey, maybe I'll see you around. I'm still learning the neighborhood. "Definitely," Mason said, too quickly. "I mean, yeah. I'm around, obviously, since I live here." Another laugh from Elliot, softer this time. "Good to know." He started to walk past, then paused. "Hey, random question, is there a good coffee shop nearby? I've been surviving on this." He raised his cup. "But I'm pretty sure it's slowly killing me." Yeah. There's a place called The Grind, about 3 blocks east. They're good. Really good, actually. Mason was aware he was talking too much, too fast, but he couldn't seem to stop. They do this thing with lavender in their lattes. That sounds weird, but it's actually amazing. And their pastries are. He cut himself off, horrified. Elliot probably thought he was insane, but Elliot was just nodding, looking genuinely interested. The grind, 3 blocks east. Got it. Thanks, Mason. The way he said Mason's name like he was tasting it. Learning its shape made heat pool in Mason's stomach. No problem, Mason said. Elliot gave a little wave and continued on his way. And Mason stood frozen on the sidewalk, watching him go. Watching the way he moved, confident, but not arrogant. Watching until he disappeared around the corner. Then Mason turned and practically ran back inside, taking the stairs 2 at a time to his room. He closed the door and leaned against it, heart pounding, face burning. Through the window, he could see Elliot's balcony again, empty in the morning light. He had talked to him, had actually stood there and talked to him, and Elliot had been nice, friendly, had laughed at Mason's awkwardness instead of being put off by it. Mason replayed the conversation in his head, analyzing every word, every inflection, the way Elliot looked at him, the way he'd said Mason's name. Was he reading too much into it? Probably. Almost definitely. Straight guys were friendly all the time. It didn't mean anything, except something in Mason's gut whispered that maybe, possibly, there had been something there. Some spark of recognition, of mutual interest. Or maybe that was just wishful thinking. Mason had never been good at reading these signals. Had spent most of his first year at university, watching other guys from a safe distance, never quite brave enough to approach. To put himself out there, he moved to the window, drawn like a magnet. From this angle, he could see into Elliot's apartment, just glimpses through the balcony door. Movement inside, Elliot unpacking his groceries, probably. Mason knew he should look away, knew this bordered on creepy, but he couldn't help himself. He had spent so long feeling nothing, wanting nothing, and now here was this person who made him feel like he was waking up from a long sleep. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. His phone buzzed. A text from his mother. "Don't forget, we have dinner with Aunt Marie tonight. Be ready by 6, Mason groaned. He had completely forgotten about his aunt's birthday dinner. That meant hours of small talk with extended family, of dodging questions about school and his plans for the future and whether he had a girlfriend yet. The last question always made his stomach clench. He typed back a thumbs-up emoji and tossed his phone on the bed. The day stretched ahead of him, suddenly feeling very long. He should do something productive, unpack the last of his boxers from university, maybe go for a run. Definitely stop staring out the window like some kind of stalker. But first, just one more look. Elliot had moved to his balcony again, this time with his laptop. He settled into a chair, barefoot and relaxed, and opened the computer. Working from home, maybe. Or just checking email. Mason watched the concentration on his face, the way he absently ran a hand through his dark hair. Beautiful, Mason thought. The words settled in his chest with the weight of truth. He had never let himself think that about another man before. Had carefully redirected those thoughts, reframed them as admiration or aesthetic appreciation. Anything but want. Anything but desire. But looking at Elliot now, bathed in morning sunlight, Mason couldn't lie to himself anymore. Couldn't pretend this feeling was anything other than what it was. He was attracted to men. Had always been attracted to men. And that meant something about himself that he had spent 19 years avoiding, ignoring, pushing down into the deepest parts of himself where it couldn't be examined too closely. The realization should have been terrifying, and it was, in a way, but it was also liberating, like finally naming something that had been lurking unnamed for years. Mason turned away from the window and lay down on his bed, staring at the ceiling. His mind raced with thoughts, questions, fears. What did this mean for his future? How would his parents react if they knew? His father with his casual homophobia, his mother with her assumptions about grandchildren and a daughter-in-law someday, and Elliot? God, Elliot. Was he even gay? Was Mason projecting, creating a fantasy out of nothing? These questions chased themselves in circles until Mason's head ached. Eventually, he got up and tried to distract himself with unpacking, with organizing his bookshelf, with anything that would keep his hands busy and his mind occupied. But every few minutes, his gaze would drift to the window, to the balcony, to the possibility of catching another glimpse of the man who had somehow, in the space of a single morning, turned Mason's entire world sideways. The dinner with Aunt Marie was exactly as tedious as Mason had anticipated. The restaurant was too warm, the conversation too loud, and everyone seemed determined to ask him invasive questions about his personal life while eating overpriced pasta. So Mason, his cousin Brenda said, leaning across the table with wine-flushed cheeks, "Any special girls at university? You must have to beat them off with a stick. Handsome boy like you." Mason felt his mother's interested gaze, his father's casual attention. The weight of expectation pressed down on him like a physical thing. "No," he said carefully, "nothing serious. Just focused on my studies." "Smart boy," Aunt Marie chimed in. "Plenty of time for all that later. Though you don't want to wait too long, my neighbor's son is 35 and still single. Can you imagine?" The horror in her voice made it clear what she thought of that scenario. Mason pushed food around his plate and tried to smile in all the right places. The dinner dragged on for 3 hours. By the time they finally left, Mason felt exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with physical tiredness. The performance of it all, pretending to be someone he wasn't, participating in conversations that felt like they were about a stranger, laughing at jokes that weren't funny, left him hollow in the car on the way home. His mother chatted about Aunt Marie's redecorating project, while his father drove in silence. Mason watched the city lights blur past and thought about Elliot. Wondered what he was doing right now, whether he was alone in his apartment, whether he ever felt this same crushing sense of isolation when they got home. Mason went straight to his room, claiming tiredness. He changed into pajama pants and sat by the window in the dark, looking out at the building next door. Most of the windows were dark, but Elliot's apartment glowed with warm light, and through the balcony door, Mason could see him moving around inside. Cooking something maybe, living his life, unaware that he was being watched. Mason knew he should feel guilty about this, should recognize it as an invasion of privacy, but he couldn't bring himself to look away. There was something hypnotic about watching Elliot exist, the casual grace of his movements, the way he seemed comfortable in his own skin in a way Mason had never felt. His phone buzzed, a text from his friend Jordan, one of the few people from high school he still kept in touch with. "Party this weekend at Marcus's place. You coming?" Mason thought about it. Thought about the last party he'd gone to, at the end of his first year at university. The awkward conversations, the drinking games that left him feeling more alienated than connected. The girl who had tried to kiss him and been confused by his polite rejection. "Maybe," he typed back. "Let me check." He wouldn't go. They both knew it. But the fiction of maybe was easier than the truth of no. He set his phone aside and looked back out the window just in time to see Elliot step onto his balcony again. He was wearing different clothes, now soft-looking sweatpants and a long-sleeved shirt and carrying a mug of something that steamed in the cool night air. Elliot settled into his chair and looked up at the sky. From this angle, Mason could see his profile clearly, the strong line of his jaw, the curve of his mouth. He wondered what Elliot was thinking about, whether he was happy here, in this new place, whether he had left someone behind, or was running toward something new, as if sensing the attention. Elliot suddenly turned his head toward Mason's building. Mason jerked back from the window, heart racing, certain he'd been caught. But when he dared to look again, Elliot was staring at his phone, scrolling through something with a small smile on his face, not looking at Mason at all. Of course not. Mason felt foolish and relieved in equal measure. He needed to get a grip on this fixation before it became something unhealthy. Elliot was just a neighbor, just a guy. The fact that he was attractive didn't mean anything, didn't give Mason the right to obsess over him. But even as he told himself this, Mason knew he would be back at this window tomorrow morning, and the morning after that, watching, hoping, caught in the gravity of something he didn't fully understand, but couldn't resist. He was still sitting there, watching Elliot drink his tea or coffee or whatever it was, when his mother knocked softly on his door. "Mason, can I come in?" He quickly moved away from the window and turned on his desk lamp, trying to look like he'd been reading or doing something productive. "Yeah, come in." Patricia opened the door and leaned against the frame. In the dim light, she looked younger, more vulnerable somehow. "I just wanted to check on you. You seemed quiet tonight." "I'm okay," Mason said automatically, "just tired." She studied him for a long moment, and Mason fought the urge to squirm under her gaze. His mother had always been perceptive, had always known when he was hiding something. He wondered what she saw now, looking at him, whether she could see the truth written on his face. "You know you can talk to me, right?" she said finally. "About anything. I know being home after your first year away must be strange. If something's bothering you, Mom, I'm fine, really." The words came out sharper than he intended, and he saw her flinch slightly. Guilt washed over him. "Sorry, I don't mean to snap. I'm just adjusting, like I said." She nodded slowly. "Okay? But the offer stands. Anytime you need to talk." She started to leave, then paused. "Oh, and I saw you talking to our new neighbor this morning, Elliot, right? He seems nice." Mason's heart skipped. "Yeah, he seems okay. Maybe you could show him around the neighborhood sometime. Help him get settled. I'm sure he'd appreciate having a friend nearby." The innocent suggestion made Mason's stomach flip. The idea of spending more time with Elliot, of having an excuse to be near him, was both thrilling and terrifying. "Maybe," Mason said, trying to sound casual, "if he wants." His mother smiled. "That's my boy, always thoughtful." She blew him a kiss and closed the door. Mason sat frozen, his mind racing. Show Elliot around the neighborhood. Spend time with him. Get to know him. It was everything Mason wanted, and exactly what he was afraid of, because the more time he spent with Elliot, the harder it would be to hide what he was feeling. And if Elliot wasn't interested, if he was straight, or taken, or just not into Mason, the rejection would be crushing. But if there was even a chance, Mason looked back out the window. Elliot had gone inside again, and his apartment was darkening, lights clicking off one by one, getting ready for bed, probably. Mason imagined what it would be like to be in that apartment with him, to talk to him without stumbling over his words, to make him laugh. To maybe he cut the thought off before it could fully form. He was getting ahead of himself, way ahead of himself. Tomorrow, he decided, he would be normal, would stop this obsessive watching, would treat Elliot like any other neighbor, friendly, but distant, casual. But even as he made this resolution, Mason knew it was a lie. He was already too far gone, already caught in the orbit of something he couldn't name but couldn't escape. He got into bed and turned off the light. But sleep was a long time coming. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Elliot's face, that smile, those eyes, the way the sunlight had caught on his skin, and underneath all of it, a question pulsed like a heartbeat. What if? The next morning, Mason woke early despite having slept poorly. His first coherent thought was of the window, of the balcony, of whether Elliot would be there again. He hated himself a little for it, for the way this stranger had somehow become the axis around which his thoughts revolved. But he still found himself pulling on clothes and moving to the window, coffee in hand, waiting, and right on schedule. Like some kind of miracle, Elliot emerged onto his balcony. Same gray sweatpants, same bare chest, same fluid movements as he began his morning routine. Mason watched, transfixed. He told himself he was learning Elliot's schedule, being observant, but really, he was just drinking in the sight of him, storing up images for later when he'd lie in bed and try not to think too hard about what they meant. Today, Elliot's workout seemed longer, more involved. He moved through poses Mason vaguely recognized from the yoga classes the university had offered: warrior poses, lunges, balances that required impressive core strength. At one point, Elliot held a headstand for what must have been 3 full minutes, and Mason found himself holding his own breath in sympathy. When Elliot finally finished and grabbed his towel, he did something different. Instead of going immediately inside, he turned fully toward Mason's building and looked up, eyes scanning the windows. Mason's heart stopped. For one impossible moment, their eyes met across the distance, and Mason was certain, absolutely certain, that Elliot could see him. That he knew Mason had been watching. That everything was about to become horribly, humiliatingly clear. But then Elliot raised his hand in a casual wave. A smile on his face, and Mason realized he was just being friendly, just acknowledging a neighbor, the way people do. Without thinking, Mason waved back, and Elliot's smile widened before he turned and headed inside. Mason stood there, hands still raised, heart hammering. Had that been directed at him specifically, or just a general wave to whoever might be looking? Was Elliot aware of being watched, or was Mason reading too much into everything? He didn't have long to wonder because his phone rang, startling him so badly he nearly dropped his coffee. His father's name flashed on the screen. "Yeah. Mason, I need you to run an errand for me this morning. Can you take the car?" His father's voice was all business, already moving on to the next thing. Mason glanced back at the window, reluctant to leave now, but knowing he couldn't refuse. "Sure, what do you need?" "I need you to pick up some supplies from the hardware store. I'll text you the list." "Can you go now?" "Yeah, I can go." "Good. Keys are on the hook." The call disconnected. No goodbye, no thank you. Just the assumption of compliance that came from 19 years of Mason being the obedient son who never caused problems. He sighed and grabbed the car keys, trying not to feel resentful. It was just an errand. He'd be gone an hour, maybe 2. Elliot would probably still be around when he got back. But as he drove to the hardware store, Mason couldn't stop thinking about that wave, about the way Elliot had looked up at his building, had seemed to search for something, for someone. The hardware store was crowded with people, taking advantage of the summer weather to work on home improvement projects. Mason navigated the aisles with his father's list, loading his cart with various items he couldn't name. Screws and brackets, and some kind of specialized drill bit. He was standing in the paint aisle, trying to find the exact shade of white his father had specified. Apparently there were 17 different variations, which seemed excessive when he heard a familiar voice behind him. Now this is a coincidence. Mason turned, and there was Elliot, holding a paint can and looking amused. "Hey," Mason managed, his brain suddenly empty of all coherent thought. "Hardware store run." Elliot gestured at Mason's cart. "Yeah, for my dad. He has a project." Mason winced at how stilted he sounded. "Same. Trying to find the right color for my bedroom. The walls are this weird beige that I swear is making me depressed." Elliot held up the can he was carrying. "What do you think? To blue?" Mason looked at the paint sample, soft slate blue, that reminded him of the ocean. "I think it's nice. Calming. That's what I'm hoping for. My last place had red walls, seemed like a good idea at the time, but I basically lived in a state of constant anxiety." Elliot set the can in his own cart and fell into step beside Mason as he continued down the aisle. "So what's your dad building?" "I have no idea," Mason admitted. "He gives me lists. I buy things. That's the extent of my involvement in his projects." Elliot laughed, and the sound made warmth spread through Mason's chest. "Smart system. My dad was the opposite. He'd try to involve me in every step, even though I had no idea what I was doing. I once hammered my thumb so badly it turned completely black. Ouch. Yeah. I don't do a lot of home improvement anymore. Mostly I just hire people or live with things being broken." Elliot paused, studying the wall of paint samples. "Hey, since you're here, can I get your opinion on something?" "Sure," Mason said, probably too eagerly. Elliot pulled out his phone and showed Mason a photo of his bedroom. It was mostly unfurnished still, just a bed and a dresser. But the bones of it were good high ceilings, hardwood floors, large windows. "I'm trying to decide between the blue and this gray." He swiped to another paint sample. "What do you think?" Mason studied both options, aware of Elliot standing close enough that he could smell that cedar scent again, could see the faint stubble on his jaw. "The blue," he said finally. "The gray would wash out with all that natural light. The blue will give it depth." "That's exactly what I was thinking," Elliot said, looking pleased. "Okay, blue it is. Thanks, Mason." There it was, again, his name in Elliot's mouth, casual and warm. Mason wanted to hear him say it 100 more times. They continued through the store together, an easy companionship falling between them as they hunted for their respective items. Elliot was funny, Mason discovered. He had a dry sense of humor and a way of making observations about the other shoppers that had Mason trying not to laugh too loudly. At one point, they passed an elderly couple arguing loudly about the merits of gas versus electric lawn mowers, and Elliot leaned close to murmur, $20 says they've been having this exact same argument for 40 years. "That's a bet I'm not taking," Mason whispered back, and they both had to turn away to hide their grins. It felt good, normal, like they were actually friends, or could be. Mason let himself relax into it, stopped overthinking every word, every gesture, let himself just enjoy Elliot's company. They ended up at the checkout lanes at the same time, and Elliot suggested they grab coffee afterward. "Unless you need to get back," he added. "I don't want to keep you." Mason thought of his father's supplies, sitting in his cart. Probably needed immediately for whatever project he was working on. Thought of the inevitable irritation if Mason took too long. "Coffee sounds great," he heard himself say. They loaded their purchases into their respective cars and then walked the 3 blocks to the grind, the coffee shop Mason had recommended. It was mid-morning now, the place humming with a gentle weekday crowd, people working on laptops, a book club meeting in the corner, the hiss and gurgle of the espresso machine providing ambient noise. "This place is perfect," Elliot said, studying the menu board. "How did I not know about this?" "You've only been here a few days," Mason pointed out. "Fair point." Elliot turned to the barista. "I'll have the lavender latte Mason recommended, and whatever he's having." "I can pay for my own," Mason started, but Elliot waved him off. "Consider it payment for helping me pick paint colors, and for the excellent coffee recommendation." They settled at a table by the window, and Mason watched Elliot take his first sip of the lavender latte, saw his eyebrows rise in surprise. "Okay, you were right. This is weird, but it works. Told you. You did." Elliot cradled the cup in both hands, and Mason noticed for the first time that he wore a thin silver ring on his right hand. "So, Mason, tell me about yourself. What do you do when you're not running errands for your dad?" "I'm at university," Mason said. "Just finished my first year. English major." "English. Nice. What made you choose that?" Mason shrugged, suddenly self-conscious. "I like books. Like reading, writing. Seemed like the obvious choice." "What kind of writing?" No one ever asked him that. People usually just nodded and changed the subject when he mentioned his major. But Elliot leaned forward, genuinely interested, and Mason found himself answering honestly. "Fiction, mostly. Short stories. I'm working on something longer, But, he trailed off. It's probably terrible. Why would it be terrible? Because I'm 19, and I don't know anything about anything. Elliot smiled. Some of the best books I've ever read were written by people who felt exactly that way. Uncertainty makes for interesting art. What about you? Mason asked, wanting to shift focus away from himself. What do you do? Graphic design. Freelance. Mostly. Which is why I can live anywhere. Elliot gestured vaguely. I was in Chicago before this, but it got too expensive. Needed a change of scenery. Why here? Honestly, I threw a dart at a map. At Mason's expression, Elliot laughed. Not literally, but kind of. I wanted somewhere smaller than Chicago, but not too small. Somewhere with decent coffee shops and bookstores, and a bit of culture. This city seemed like a good fit. Are you liking it so far? Yeah, Elliot said, and his eyes met Mason's across the table. Yeah, I am. The moment stretched between them, warm and loaded with something Mason couldn't quite name. He wanted to ask if Elliot had left anyone behind in Chicago. Wanted to know if he was single, if he was lonely, if he felt even a fraction of what Mason was feeling. But he didn't ask, couldn't. The words stuck in his throat, weighted down by fear. What about you? Elliot asked. Do you like living here? It's okay, Mason said. It's home, you know? But it's also, I don't know, small, sometimes. Like everyone knows everyone, and there's not a lot of room for. He stopped himself, unsure how to finish that sentence without revealing too much. Room for being different, Elliot suggested gently. Mason looked at him sharply, but Elliot's expression was understanding, not judgmental. Yeah, Mason said quietly. Something like that. Elliot nodded slowly. I get that. I grew up in a small town in Ohio. Great people, but very homogeneous. Very specific ideas about how life should look. There was something in the way he said it. Some undertone that made Mason's pulse quicken. Was Elliot saying what Mason thought he was saying? Or was this just wishful thinking again? Before he could figure out how to respond, Elliot's phone buzzed. He glanced at it and grimaced. Sorry, I have to take this. Work thing, he answered, stepping away from the table. And Mason watched him through the window, gesturing as he talked, his expression animated. Mason pulled out his own phone and saw 3 missed calls from his father. Guilt washed over him. He'd been gone 2 hours, and the supplies were still sitting in his car. He texted, sorry, got coffee, on my way home soon. The response was immediate. Now, please. Waiting on these. Elliot came back to the table, pocketing his phone. Emergency job. Client freaking out about a logo design. He grabbed his coffee. I should probably head back and deal with this, but this was nice. We should do it again. Definitely, Mason said, standing, and I need to get back too. My dad's waiting on his supplies. They walked back to their cars together, and when they reached the parking lot, Elliot paused. Hey, so my apartment is still basically empty. I need to buy furniture, kitchen stuff, all of that. If you're free sometime this week, maybe you could help. You seem to have good taste. He gestured at Mason's clothes. Nothing special, just jeans and a plain t-shirt. But the way Elliot looked at him made it feel like he was wearing something interesting. Sure, Mason said, trying to keep his voice level, even though his heart was doing gymnastics. I can help. Awesome. I'll text you. Elliot paused. Actually, I don't have your number. They exchanged phones and input their numbers, and Mason tried not to think about the significance of this, of having Elliot's contact information, of the possibility of texts and calls, and continued connection. Thanks again for the coffee advice, Elliot said, and the paint advice. You're basically my guide to this city now. Happy to help, Mason said, and meant it. He drove home in a daze, Elliot's number burning a hole in his phone, the memory of their conversation replaying on a loop. When he got home, his father was waiting in the garage, looking impatient. What took so long? Ran into a friend, Mason said, carrying in the supplies. Sorry. His father grunted and started going through the items, checking them against his list. Mason excused himself and headed upstairs, closing his bedroom door and immediately going to the window. Elliot's apartment was visible again, and through the balcony door, Mason could see him sitting at his desk, presumably dealing with his work emergency. He looked focused, intense, fingers flying over his keyboard. Mason's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. This is Elliot. In case my number doesn't show up, are you free Thursday afternoon for furniture shopping? I promise I won't make you carry anything heavy. Mason saved the contact and typed back, Thursday works, and I can carry heavy things. Probably. The response was immediate. We'll see about that. An emoji. A smiley face. Mason stared at it like he could decode some hidden meaning, some confirmation of interest. But it was just a friendly emoji. People used them all the time. It didn't mean anything, except it did. To Mason, it meant everything. He set his phone down and lay back on his bed, staring at the ceiling. In the span of 24 hours, Elliot had gone from being a beautiful stranger to being someone with a phone number. Someone who wanted to spend time with him. Someone who seemed to actually enjoy his company. It was more than Mason had dared hope for. And it was terrifying, because the more time he spent with Elliot, the more obvious his feelings would become. And when Elliot inevitably figured it out, when Mason's attraction became too clear to ignore, everything would change. The easy friendship they were building would turn awkward, uncomfortable. Elliot would pull away, would make excuses, and Mason would be left with the ashes of what might have been, unless Elliot felt it too, unless those moments of connection, of eye contact, of something unspoken passing between them, unless those were real, and not just Mason's imagination. The possibility was intoxicating and terrifying in equal measure. Mason rolled over and looked out the window again. Elliot was still working, but as Mason watched, he stood and stretched, rolling his shoulders. Then he stepped onto his balcony, leaning against the railing, and looked up at the sky. From this angle, Mason could see his profile perfectly, could see the way the afternoon light caught in his hair, could see the slight frown of concentration still lingering on his face. Beautiful, Mason thought again, and this time, he let himself really feel it, let himself acknowledge the want, the desire, the hope. He was falling for Elliot. Had maybe already fallen, and whatever happened next, whether it led to heartbreak or something more, Mason knew he couldn't stop it, wouldn't stop it, even if he could. Thursday arrived slower than Mason wanted, and faster than he was ready for. He changed clothes 3 times before settling on dark jeans and a green button-down that brought out his eyes, casual but put together. Not trying too hard. Except he absolutely was trying too hard, and he knew it. Elliot texted at 1 p.m. Ready when you are. Want me to come get you, or should we meet somewhere? I'll come to you, Mason typed back. Give me 5 minutes. He took the stairs 2 at a time, calling out to his mother that he was going out. With who? She called back from the kitchen. Elliot, the neighbor. He needs help with furniture shopping. There was a pause, and then his mother appeared in the doorway, smiling. That's sweet of you to help. Have fun. Mason escaped before she could ask more questions, crossing the small stretch of lawn between their buildings. He'd never been to Elliot's door before, had only watched from afar, and now that he was here, his nerves kicked into overdrive. He knocked, and Elliot opened almost immediately, like he'd been waiting right there. Hey. Elliot stepped back to let Mason in. Welcome to the sad, empty apartment. He wasn't kidding. The place was spacious and bright, with the same high ceilings and hardwood floors Mason had seen in the photo, but it was sparsely furnished. A couch in the living room, the TV on a cardboard box, no coffee table. The walls were still the beige Elliot had complained about, though Mason could see paint supplies in the corner. Apparently, the blue bedroom was already underway. It's not that bad, Mason offered. Liar. It's terrible. But you're sweet to pretend. Elliot grabbed his keys and wallet from the kitchen counter, one of the few pieces of furniture that had come with the place. I made a list of things I need, but honestly, I have no idea where to even start. There's a good furniture store about 20 minutes from here, Mason said. They have decent prices and a lot of variety. Perfect. You're driving, by the way. My car is still full of paint supplies. They took Mason's car, and once they were on the road, Elliot connected his phone to the stereo and pulled up a playlist. Indie rock, melodic, and a little melancholy filled the car. This okay? Elliot asked. Yeah, it's good. They drove with the windows down, summer air rushing through the car, and Mason felt something loosen in his chest. This was nice, easy, like they'd known each other for years instead of days. So, Elliot said after a while, tell me about university. Do you like it? Mostly, Mason said. The classes are good. The people are different. Different how? Mason chose his words carefully. More open-minded, I guess. Less concerned with fitting in. At least in the circles I ended up in. The writer circles. Yeah, they're intense, but in a good way. Everyone's so passionate about their work, about literature. It's refreshing after high school, where half the people were just going through the motions. Elliot nodded. I remember that feeling. When I got to art school, and suddenly I was surrounded by people who actually cared about design, who wanted to talk about color theory and typography. It was like coming home. Exactly. Mason glanced over at him. Do you miss it? Chicago, art school, all of that. Sometimes, Elliot admitted. I miss the energy of the city, but I don't miss the pressure, the constant hustle. Everyone trying to outcool everyone else. It got exhausting. Is that why you left? Elliot was quiet for a moment, and Mason worried he'd pushed too far. But then Elliot said, that was part of it. I had a relationship that ended badly, needed some distance. Mason's hands tightened on the steering wheel. A relationship? So Elliot had dated someone in Chicago, but he didn't specify gender, and Mason didn't know how to ask without revealing too much of his own interest. I'm sorry, he said instead. Breakups suck. Yeah, they do. But it was for the best. We wanted different things, had different ideas about the future. Better to figure that out sooner rather than later. Elliot shifted in his seat, looking out the window. What about you? Anyone special waiting for you back at university? No, Mason said, probably too quickly. No one. By choice, or just haven't found the right person yet. This was dangerous territory. Mason could feel the conversation shifting into something more personal, more revealing. He could deflect, could change the subject. But something about the way Elliot asked genuine curiosity without judgment made him want to be honest. Haven't found the right person, he said. I think I'm still figuring out what I want. Elliot turned to look at him, and Mason could feel his gaze, even without meeting it. That's fair. 19 is young. You've got time. What about you? Mason asked, emboldened. Are you looking? Or, I'm open to it, Elliot said. But I'm not actively searching. If something happens, great. If not, I'm good being on my own for a while. They pulled into the furniture store parking lot, and the conversation shifted to safer topics. What kind of coffee table Elliot needed, whether a dining set was necessary. The eternal debate over beanbags versus actual chairs. Inside the store, Elliot was charmingly indecisive, sitting on every couch, testing every chair, debating the merits of modern versus traditional design. Mason found himself laughing more than he had in weeks, watching Elliot dramatically flop onto a leather recliner and declare it to bourgeois. What does that even mean? Mason asked. I don't know, but it feels true. They eventually settled on a simple but comfortable couch in charcoal gray, a coffee table made of reclaimed wood, and a dining set that Elliot insisted was perfect, despite being slightly too expensive. I'll just eat ramen for a month, he said, when Mason pointed out the price. Worth it for chairs that don't make my back hurt. At the checkout, Elliot arranged for delivery and then turned to Mason. Thank you for this. I would have been wandering around here for hours by myself, eventually having a breakdown in the lamp section. The lamp section does have that effect, Mason agreed. Can I buy you dinner? As a thank you. Mason's heart jumped. You don't have to, I want to. There's a Thai place I've been wanting to try, unless you're not into Thai food. I love Thai food. Perfect. The restaurant was small and crowded, the air thick with the smell of lemongrass and chili. They squeezed into a booth in the back, and Elliot ordered enough food for 4 people. I have a problem with over-ordering, he admitted, when Mason raised an eyebrow. But hey, leftovers. Over pad thai and green curry, and spring rolls they probably didn't need. They talked, really talked. Elliot told stories about his childhood in Ohio, about his conservative family who didn't quite understand his career choice, about the first time he realized he wanted to be a designer, and Mason, emboldened by Elliot's openness, found himself sharing more than he usually did, about his love of writing, about feeling like an outsider in his own hometown, about the strange liminal space of being home from university and not quite fitting into either world. It's like I'm 2 different people, Mason said, pushing rice around his plate. The person I am here, and the person I am at school. And I don't know which one is real. Maybe they both are, Elliot suggested. Maybe we're all just different versions of ourselves, depending on context. That doesn't make any version less real. That's very philosophical for someone who just ate their body weight in spring rolls. Elliot laughed. I contain multitudes. As the evening wore on, Mason became increasingly aware of the intimacy of their corner booth, of how their knees occasionally bumped under the table, of the way Elliot's eyes crinkled when he smiled. He was hyper-aware of every gesture, every word, looking for signs, for confirmation, for any indication that this meant something more than just friendship. And maybe it was wishful thinking, but Mason could have sworn he saw it in the way Elliot looked at him sometimes, with something that went beyond casual interest. In the way he leaned forward when Mason spoke, like he didn't want to miss a word. In the lingering eye contact that lasted a beat too long to be entirely platonic. Or maybe Mason was just seeing what he wanted to see. When they finally left the restaurant, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. They drove back with the windows down again. The playlist shifted to something slower, more contemplative. Thanks again for today, Elliot said as Mason pulled into the parking lot between their buildings. Seriously, I know furniture shopping isn't exactly thrilling, but you made it fun. I had a good time, Mason said honestly. They sat there for a moment, neither moving to get out of the car. The air felt charged with something unspoken, and Mason's heart raced as he tried to figure out if he should say something, do something, acknowledge whatever this tension was. But then Elliot opened his door, breaking the moment. Well, I should let you get back, but let's do this again soon. Yeah, Mason managed. Definitely. He watched Elliot walk to his building, watched him turn and wave before disappearing inside. Then Mason sat in the car for another 5 minutes, processing the day, the conversation, the feeling that something significant had happened, even if he couldn't quite articulate what. When he finally went inside, his parents were watching TV in the living room. His mother looked up with interest. How was furniture shopping? Good, Mason said. Elliot got everything he needed. He seems like a nice young man, she said. It's good that you're making friends. Friends. The word landed like a stone in Mason's chest. Because that's all this was, wasn't it? Friendship. Elliot being nice to his new neighbor. Mason reading too much into every interaction because he was desperate for connection. Desperate to be seen. He mumbled something non-committal and headed upstairs, closing his door and immediately going to the window. Elliot's apartment was lit up, and through the balcony door, Mason could see him unpacking takeout containers, their leftovers from dinner. His phone buzzed. A text from Elliot, already missing that pad tie. Today was great. Thanks for being my furniture consultant. Mason stared at the message, reading it over and over, trying to extract meaning from every word choice, every punctuation mark. Anytime, he typed back, "Let me know when you need help with the lamp section breakdown." "Will do." There was that emoji again. Mason added it to his mental collection of maybes, filed away with the knee bumps and the eye contact, and the way Elliot had said, "Let's do this again soon," like he really meant it. He changed into pajamas and got into bed, but sleep felt impossible. His mind was too full, his body too wired from a day of being close to Elliot, of learning his mannerisms and his laugh, and the way he gestured when he was excited about something. Mason thought about what Elliot had said about his relationship ending in Chicago, thought about how he'd said they wanted different things, carefully. Was that deliberate? Was Elliot trying to leave space for possibility, or was Mason just projecting his own hopes onto ambiguous pronouns? He grabbed his laptop and, before he could talk himself out of it, opened a private browser window and typed, "How to tell if a guy is interested in you." The results were a mix of helpful and absurd lists of signs, forum discussions, articles about body language, and flirting cues. Mason read through them methodically, checking off the ones that might apply to Elliot. Sustained eye contact, check. Finding excuses to spend time together, check. Physical proximity, casual touching, maybe. The knee bumps could have been accidental. But the more he read, the more confused he became, because every sign could be interpreted multiple ways. Every gesture could be friendship or interest. There was no clear answer, no definitive test. Mason closed the laptop with a frustrated sigh. This was pointless. The only way to know for sure would be to ask, and that was terrifying on multiple levels, because if Elliot said no, if he wasn't interested, if he was straight, if he was just being friendly, Mason would have to see him every day. "I'll attempt to cook something. It'll probably be terrible, but we can order pizza when I inevitably fail. You don't have to. I want to, please." And there it was, again, that look, that intensity that made Mason feel like the only person in the world. How was he supposed to say no to that? "Okay," Mason agreed. "What time?" 7. "I'll be there." Mason spent the rest of the afternoon in a state of nervous energy. He changed clothes 4 times, finally settling on dark jeans and a soft gray sweater that his mother had gotten him for Christmas. He tried to read, tried to write, tried to do anything that would make the time pass faster. At 6:55, he knocked on Elliot's door. Elliot answered barefoot, hair slightly damp, like he'd just showered, wearing jeans and a worn green Henley that brought out flecks of gold in his eyes that Mason had never noticed before. "You're early," Elliot said, smiling. "I can come back. Don't be ridiculous. Come in." The apartment looked more lived in than the last time Mason had been here. The furniture they'd bought was arranged nicely, and the bedroom visible down the hall was now completely painted that beautiful slate blue. There were books on the shelves, art on the walls, mostly prints of graphic designs and vintage travel posters. "Your place looks great," Mason said. "Thanks. Turns out I can make a space feel like home when I actually try." Elliot led him to the kitchen, where a cutting board covered in somewhat unevenly chopped vegetables sat next to a recipe pulled up on his tablet. "Okay, so I'm attempting chicken stir-fry. And by attempting, I mean I've already burned myself twice, and I haven't even turned on the stove yet. How did you manage that? Don't underestimate my ability to hurt myself in the kitchen. It's a genuine talent." Mason laughed and rolled up his sleeves. "Okay, let me help before you do some serious damage." They cooked together, falling into an easy rhythm. Mason handled the actual cooking, while Elliot chopped more vegetables and provided running commentary. It was domestic and comfortable, and Mason tried not to think too hard about how natural this felt. How right? "You're good at this?" Elliot observed, watching Mason expertly flip the chicken in the pan. "My mom made me learn the basics before I went to university. She didn't want me living on ramen." "Smart woman. My mom tried to teach me too, but I was too convinced I'd figure it out on my own." Elliot gestured at the kitchen. Clearly that was a mistake. The stir-fry actually turned out well, and they ate at Elliot's new dining table, talking easily about everything and nothing. Elliot told him more about the big client project, about his vision for the rebrand. Mason talked about the novel he was trying to write, admitting that he was stuck on a particular plot point. "What's the story about?" Elliot asked. Mason hesitated. The novel was deeply personal, loosely based on his own experiences of feeling like an outsider, but he found himself wanting to share it with Elliot, wanting his opinion. "It's about a guy trying to figure out who he is," Mason said carefully, "coming to terms with parts of himself he's been hiding." Elliot nodded slowly. "Sounds powerful. Is it autobiographical?" "Isn't all fiction, at least a little, autobiographical?" "True." Elliot poured them both more wine. He'd opened a bottle halfway through dinner, and they'd been steadily working their way through it. What's he hiding? This was it. This was the moment where Mason could be honest, could test the waters, could see how Elliot reacted. The wine had loosened his tongue, made him brave. "He's gay," Mason said, watching Elliot's face carefully. "And he's afraid of what that means. Afraid of how people will react. Afraid of changing how people see him." Elliot's expression didn't change, didn't show shock or discomfort, just understanding. "That sounds really relatable. There's something universal about being afraid to show people who you really are." "Yeah," Mason said softly. "Yeah, exactly." They held eye contact across the table, and something unspoken passed between them. Mason felt his heart racing, felt the wine courage pushing him toward saying more, toward asking the questions that had been circling in his mind for weeks. But before he could, Elliot's phone rang. He glanced at it and grimaced. "Sorry, it's the client. I have to take this." He stepped into the bedroom, and Mason could hear his voice, professional and capable, discussing design elements and time. He cleared the dinner plates, loading Elliot's dishwasher, trying to calm his racing thoughts. When Elliot emerged 15 minutes later, he looked frustrated. "Sorry. They're being indecisive about color palettes and wanted my opinion right now. It's fine. I should probably get going anyway." Mason glanced at his phone. It was nearly 10. "You don't have to," Elliot said quickly. "We could watch a movie or something." The offer was tempting, but Mason could feel the weight of everything unsaid pressing down on him. He needed space, to think, to process. "Rain check," he said. "I'm kind of tired." Elliot looked disappointed, but didn't push. "Yeah, of course." He walked Mason to the door, and they stood there for a moment in the threshold, neither quite ready to end the evening. "Thanks for helping with dinner," Elliot said. "And for the company. This was really nice." "It was," Mason agreed. They stood there for another beat, and Mason wondered if Elliot could hear his heart pounding, could sense the wanting radiating off him in waves. "Good night, Mason. Good night." Mason walked the short distance back to his own building, hyper-aware of Elliot watching from the doorway. When he got inside, he went straight to his room and to the window, looking back across at Elliot's apartment. Elliot was still on his balcony, leaning on the railing, staring up at the stars. After a moment, he pulled out his phone and typed something. Mason's phone buzzed. "I meant what I said earlier. You're important to me." Mason's fingers hovered over the keyboard. He wanted to say so much, wanted to confess everything, lay his heart bare. But fear held him back. "You're important to me too," he typed finally. Safe, non-committal. He watched Elliot read the message, saw him smile softly before pocketing his phone and heading inside. Mason got ready for bed, but sleep was impossible. His mind kept replaying the evening, the easy domesticity of cooking together, the conversation about his novel. The way Elliot had looked at him across the table. And the question that wouldn't leave him alone. Did Elliot know? Could he tell that Mason was talking about himself when he described his character? And if he did know, what did he think about it? Mason rolled over and grabbed his laptop, opening it to the document containing his novel. He read through what he'd written so far, Boyd discovering his sexuality, navigating the terror and joy of it, trying to find his place in a world that felt hostile to his truth. It was all so thinly veiled. Anyone reading it would know it was personal, and he'd just basically handed Elliot the key to understanding him. The vulnerability of it made Mason's chest tight, but also there was relief in it, in having said it, even indirectly. And having put it out there, he thought about what would happen next. Would Elliot figure it out and pull away? Or would he, maybe, possibly, understand in a way that suggested his own similar experiences? Mason didn't have answers. All he had was hope and fear in equal measure, and the certain knowledge that whatever happened, he couldn't go back to pretending he didn't feel what he felt. The door was open now. All that remained was waiting to see if anyone would walk through it. The next morning, Mason woke to his phone buzzing insistently. He grabbed it, still half asleep, and saw multiple texts from Elliot. "You awake? I need your opinion on something. It's kind of urgent, Kay. Not urgent, but design urgent, which feels urgent to me." Mason smiled despite his grogginess, and typed back, "I'm awake now. What's up?" The response was immediate. "Can you come over? I need fresh eyes on this project and I'm going slightly insane. Give me 20 minutes." Mason threw on clothes and brushed his teeth, not bothering with breakfast. When he got to Elliot's apartment, the door was already open, and he could hear music playing, something electronic and energetic. "In here," Elliot called from the living room. Mason found him surrounded by printouts, his laptop open, design sketches scattered across every surface. He looked like he hadn't slept, hair sticking up in different directions, still wearing what might have been yesterday's clothes. "How long have you been awake?" Mason asked. "Define awake." "I may have pulled an all-nighter." Elliot gestured at the chaos around him. "The clients sent over their feedback at midnight, and I got sucked in trying to fix things, and now I can't tell if anything looks good anymore. Everything's starting to look the same." Mason sat down next to him on the couch, close enough that their shoulders touched. "Okay, talk me through it. What are you trying to accomplish?" For the next hour, Elliot explained his vision, showed Mason different variations, asked his opinion on color choices and font pairings, and Mason, despite knowing nothing about graphic design, found himself able to give useful feedback, not about the technical aspects, but about how things made him feel, what drew his eye, what seemed to work emotionally. "This one," Mason said, pointing to a design that used deep blues and clean lines. "It feels trustworthy, professional, but not cold." Elliot stared at it, then at Mason. "You're right. That's exactly what they want, and I've been overthinking it." He pulled Mason into an impulsive hug. "You're a genius." Mason froze, hyper-aware of everywhere their bodies touched, of Elliot's warmth, of the cedar scent come to associate with him. The hug lasted just a moment longer than strictly friendly, and when Elliot pulled back, there was something in his expressions, something Mason couldn't quite read. "Sorry," Elliot said, though he didn't sound sorry. "I get affectionate when I'm sleep-deprived." "It's okay," Mason managed, his heart still racing. Elliot rubbed his eyes. "I should probably sleep before I submit this. Make sure I still think it's good when I'm not delirious." "That's probably smart." But Elliot didn't move. Instead, he turned to look at Mason, really look at him, with an intensity that made Mason want to squirm and lean in simultaneously. "Can I ask you something?" Elliot said. "Sure. Your novel. The character who's figuring out he's gay. Is that?" Elliot paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "Is that based on you?" Mason's breath caught. This was it. the moment of truth. He could lie, could deflect, could maintain the safety of ambiguity, or he could be brave. Yeah, he said quietly. It is. Elliot nodded slowly, no surprise in his expression. I thought so. The way you talked about it. The way you understood exactly what that fear feels like. He paused. Thank you for telling me. You're not. You don't think that's weird or anything? Weird. Elliot looked genuinely confused. Why would I think that's weird? I don't know. Some people do? Well, I'm not some people. Elliot's hand moved, almost unconsciously, to rest on Mason's knee. Mason, I'm gay too. The world tilted. Mason stared at Elliot, at his hand on Mason's knee, at the openness in his face, and felt something huge shift inside his chest. You are? Yeah, I thought. I mean, I've been trying to signal it without being too obvious. The pronouns when I talked about my ex, the way I... Elliot laughed softly. I've been flirting with you for weeks. I thought you knew. I wasn't sure, Mason admitted. I hoped, but I didn't want to assume and make things weird. Make things weird, Elliot repeated, his smile growing. Mason, I've been watching you from my balcony, just as much as you've been watching me from your window. Heat flooded Mason's face. You knew about that? Kind of hard to miss. Not that I minded. It was actually really sweet. Every morning I'd look up and there you'd be. Elliot's thumb was moving in small circles on Mason's knee, probably unconsciously. I moved here to figure out what I wanted, who I wanted to be away from all the pressure and expectations. And then I met you, and suddenly, everything felt clearer. What do you mean? Elliot shifted closer, his hand moving from Mason's knee to cup his face, thumb brushing across his cheekbone. I mean that I haven't been able to stop thinking about you. I mean that every time I see you, I have to physically restrain myself from kissing you. I mean that the reason I'm not committing to staying or leaving is because the only thing making me want to stay is you. And that terrifies me, because I've known you for less than a month, and that's not enough time to make life decisions around someone else. Mason's heart was hammering so hard he was sure Elliot could feel it. What if I want you to? Want me to what? Make decisions around me. Stay because of me. Elliot's eyes searched his face. Mason, you're 19. You have your whole life ahead of you. You shouldn't be tying yourself to someone who doesn't even know where he's going to be living in 6 months. What if I don't care about that? You should care, but I don't. Mason leaned into Elliot's touch, emboldened by the confession. By the want he could see so clearly in Elliot's eyes now that he knew to look for it. I care about you. I care about this, whatever this is. And maybe it's stupid, because we barely know each other. But I've never felt like this before. Like I'm finally seeing in color, after living in black and white. Elliot made a sound that was half laugh, half exhale. You can't say things like that. Why not? Because it makes it really hard to be sensible, and cautious, and all the things I'm supposed to be. Then don't be. Mason's hand came up to cover Elliot's, where it still cupped his face. Don't be sensible. Be honest. For a long moment, they just looked at each other. Then, Elliot leaned in, slowly, giving Mason every opportunity to pull away. But Mason didn't pull away. He met Elliot halfway, and when their lips finally touched, it felt like every cliché Mason had ever read and dismissed as unrealistic. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, both of them learning the shape of each other. Then Elliot's hand slid into Mason's hair, and Mason's hands found Elliot's waist, and suddenly it was deeper, more urgent, weeks of wanting, pouring into this single point of connection. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Elliot rested his forehead against Mason's. I've wanted to do that since the day we met, Elliot said. Me too, yeah. Yeah. Mason kissed him again, shorter this time, softer. I've been going crazy trying to figure out if you felt the same way. I thought I was being obvious. You are not being obvious. Elliot laughed. and Mason felt it vibrate through both of them, where they were pressed together. Okay, well, I'm being obvious now. I like you, Mason, a lot. Probably more than is reasonable given the timeline. I like you too. So much. Mason pulled back just enough to see Elliot's face properly. So what does this mean? What happens now? I don't know, Elliot admitted. I don't have all the answers. But I know I want to figure it out with you. If you're willing to deal with my commitment issues and my mess of a life, I'm willing. They kissed again, and this time they let it linger, exploring, learning. Mason had been kissed before, awkward attempts at parties. A girl in high school who he'd tried to convince himself he was interested in, but nothing had ever felt like this. Like coming home and discovering something new simultaneously. Eventually, they ended up lying on the couch. Elliot's back against the armrest with Mason half on top of him, their legs tangled together. Elliot ran his fingers through Mason's hair, and Mason traced patterns on Elliot's chest through his shirt. I should probably sleep, Elliot murmured, but made no move to get up. Probably. Don't want to, though. Don't want to stop touching you. Mason lifted his head to look at him. I'm not going anywhere. Promise. Promise. Elliot's eyes were already drifting closed, exhaustion finally catching up with him. Mason watched him fall asleep, watched the tension leave his face, and felt overwhelmed by the tenderness he felt. This was real. This was happening. Elliot wanted him, had been wanting him. And now they were here, tangled together on a couch, and it felt like the beginning of something huge. Mason carefully extracted himself and found a blanket to drape over Elliot. He should go home, should give Elliot space to actually rest. But before he left, he pressed a soft kiss to Elliot's forehead. Elliot's eyes flickered open. Stay, he mumbled. Please. Just for a while. Mason couldn't refuse. He settled back down, and Elliot immediately curled into him, head on Mason's chest. Within minutes, he was asleep again, breathing deep and even. And Mason lay there, holding him, feeling the weight and warmth of him, and thought, This is what I've been missing. This is what I've been afraid to want. His phone buzzed in his pocket. Carefully, trying not to wake Elliot, he pulled it out and saw a text from his mother. Where are you? It's almost lunchtime at Elliot's helping with a project. Be home later. He typed back. The response came quickly. Okay. Don't forget, we have family dinner tonight at 6. Mason had completely forgotten. Every Sunday. They had dinner with his grandparents, a long-standing tradition that was non-negotiable in his family. He looked down at Elliot, peaceful in sleep, and felt the weight of two worlds pressing against each other. This new, fragile thing with Elliot, and his family, his old life, where he was still the straight son with the bright future. Eventually, he'd have to reconcile those worlds. But for now, for this moment, he let himself just exist in this one. Let himself be Mason, who was wanted, who was holding someone he cared about, who had finally stopped hiding from himself. He must have drifted off too, because the next thing he knew, Elliot was shifting against him, waking up. Hey, Elliot said, voice rough with sleep. You stayed. You asked me to. I did, didn't I? Elliot stretched, then settled back against Mason. What time is it? Mason checked his phone. Almost 3. We slept for 5 hours. You needed it. Elliot tilted his head up to look at Mason. I really like waking up with you. Yeah. He pushed up on his elbow and kissed Mason, slow and thorough. We should probably talk about this. About us. Set some ground rules or expectations, or whatever. Okay. What do you want? Elliot sat up fully, and Mason immediately missed his warmth. I want to date you. Actually date you. Not just hook up or keep things casual. But I also want to be realistic about the complications. You're not out to your family, right? Mason shook his head. And I'm still figuring out my living situation. So maybe we take this slow. See how things develop without putting too much pressure on it? I can do slow, Mason agreed, though part of him wanted to rush headlong into this, wanted to claim Elliot completely. But he understood the wisdom of caution. As long as slow doesn't mean secret. What do you mean? I don't want to hide this. Hide you. I've been hiding who I am for 19 years, and I'm tired of it. So if we're doing this, I need to know that you're not ashamed of being with me. Ashamed? Elliot looked shocked. Mason, no. God, no. I want to shout from the rooftops that I just want to make sure you're ready for that. Coming out is a big deal. And it should happen on your timeline, not because I'm pushing you. I know, but I want to. I'm ready to. Even as he said it, Mason felt a flutter of fear, but underneath the fear was certainty. He was done pretending. Then we'll figure it out together, Elliot said. Whatever you need, whatever timeline works for you, I'm here. They kissed again, and Mason felt some of his anxiety ease. They would figure it out. Together. I should probably go, Mason said reluctantly. Family dinner tonight. But maybe tomorrow we could actually go on a date. Like a proper one. I'd like that. Elliot walked him to the door, and they stood there for a long moment, neither wanting to separate. Text me later. Definitely. One more kiss, and then Mason forced himself to leave. He walked back to his house feeling like he was floating, like the world had been repainted in brighter colors. His mother was in the kitchen when he came in, preparing something for dinner. There you are. How was your project with Elliot? Good, Mason said, and he couldn't keep the smile off his face. Really good. His mother looked at him curiously. You seem happy. I am. She studied him for a moment, and Mason wondered what she saw. If the change in him was visible, written across his face. I'm glad, she said finally. It's good to see you coming out of your shell. The phrase made Mason want to laugh. If only she knew how literal that was becoming. He went upstairs and immediately texted Elliot. Miss you already. The response was instant. Same. Can't stop thinking about you. Good. Very good. What time's your family dinner over? Usually around 8. Why? Want to come over after? We could watch a movie or just talk. I'm not ready to spend a whole evening without you. Mason's heart swelled. I'll be there. The family dinner was both easier and harder than Mason expected. Easier because he was too distracted by thoughts of Elliot to get dragged into his usual anxiety. Harder because every casual question from his grandmother, any nice girls at university, when are you going to bring someone home for us to meet, felt like a lie by omission. His grandfather, as usual, spent most of dinner complaining about politics and kids these days with their strange ideas. Mason had learned long ago to tune him out. But today, one comment caught his attention. Saw on the news, they're letting those people get married now, in more states. His grandfather grumbled. What's next? Marrying animals. Mason's mother shot him a warning look. Dad, please. Not at dinner. I'm just saying, in my day, we had standards. We knew what was natural and what wasn't. Mason felt his jaw clench, felt anger rising hot in his chest. This was the world he'd grown up in, the reason he'd kept himself hidden for so long. And suddenly, the thought of continuing to hide, of letting comments like that slide, felt unbearable. Actually, Grandpa, he heard himself say, I think love is love, and if two people want to get married, their gender shouldn't matter. The table went silent. His grandfather stared at him, his mother looked startled, and his father put down his fork with deliberate care. That's a very modern view, his father said carefully. It's a human view, Mason replied, his heart pounding. Everyone deserves to be happy, to love who they love. His grandmother patted his hand. Of course, dear, you always did have a big heart, though I do think there's something to be said for tradition. The conversation moved on, but Mason felt shaken. He'd stood up, had voiced an opinion that went against his family's values. It wasn't a full coming out, but it was a step, a declaration of where he stood. When dinner finally ended, Mason practically ran to his car. He drove to Elliot's apartment, and when Elliot opened the door, Mason kissed him immediately, desperately. "Whoa," Elliot said when they broke apart. "Not that I'm complaining, but what was that for?" "I just needed to. Is that okay?" "More than okay." Elliot pulled him inside and into another kiss. "Want to talk about it?" Mason told him about dinner, about his grandfather's comment, about speaking up. Elliot listened, holding Mason's hand, his thumb tracing circles on Mason's palm. "I'm proud of you," Elliot said when Mason finished. "That took courage. I was scared the whole time." Courage isn't not being scared. It's being scared and doing it anyway. Elliot kissed his forehead. "And whenever you're ready to have the bigger conversation with them, I'll be here. Whatever you need." They ended up on the couch again, this time with a movie playing that neither of them really watched. Mason was too focused on the feeling of being held, of Elliot's arms around him, of the way Elliot occasionally kissed his temple or ran his fingers through Mason's hair. "Can I ask you something?" Mason said during a particularly boring part of the movie. "Anything. When did you know that you were gay?" Elliot was quiet for a moment. "I think part of me always knew, but I didn't let myself really acknowledge it until I was in college. I had this friend, Tyler, and we were close in a way that felt different than my other friendships. And one night we kissed, and suddenly everything made sense. All the ways I'd felt different, felt like I was pretending. It all clicked into place." "What happened with Tyler?" "Nothing, actually. He freaked out, said it was a mistake. We stopped talking after that." Elliot's arms tightened around Mason. "It hurt, but it also forced me to be honest with myself. I came out to my family that summer. It didn't go great." "What happened?" "My parents are very religious. They tried to be understanding, but they also suggested I talk to their pastor, try to work through it. My sister was the only one who was completely supportive." Elliot's voice was carefully neutral, but Mason could hear the old pain underneath. "Eventually, they came around. Mostly, we don't talk about it much, but they don't try to change me anymore either. I'm sorry, it is what it is. Some families take longer to adjust than others." Elliot shifted so he could see Mason's face. "What about you? When did you know?" "Honestly, I think I've been lying to myself for years, but I really knew when I saw you. When I looked at you and felt something I'd never let myself feel before." Mason felt his cheeks heat. "That sounds ridiculous, doesn't it? Love at first sight, or whatever." "It doesn't sound ridiculous. It sounds sweet." Elliot kissed him softly. "For what it's worth, I felt it too. That first day when we ran into each other by the mailboxes. You looked at me like you were trying to memorize my face, and I thought, I want to know this person. I want to know everything about him. Really? Really? Another kiss? You're very easy to fall for, Mason." They stayed like that for hours, talking and kissing and just being together. When Mason finally left reluctantly, after midnight, he felt like a different person than he'd been that morning. More solid, more certain, more himself. Over the next few weeks, they fell into a pattern. Morning coffee dates before Elliot started work. Evenings at Elliot's apartment, cooking together, or watching movies, or just talking. Long conversations about everything: their childhoods, their dreams, their fears. Mason learned that Elliot had wanted to be an artist as a kid, but his parents had pushed him towards something more practical, hence graphic design. That he was terrified of deep water because he'd nearly drowned when he was 8. That he cried at animal movies, but not at people movies, which he found deeply embarrassing. And Elliot learned that Mason had never had a real relationship before. That he wrote poetry he never showed anyone. Matty was scared of disappointing his parents, but also desperate to be authentic. They were careful in public: no overt displays of affection, nothing that would raise questions. But in private, they were inseparable. Mason had never felt so seen, so understood, so completely accepted. His mother noticed a change in him. "You're different lately," she commented one morning over breakfast. "Lighter." "What's changed?" Mason considered his options. He could deflect, could lie, but he was tired of lying. "I met someone," he said carefully. His mother's face lit up. "Really? That's wonderful. What's her name?" Here it was, the moment of truth. Mason took a breath. "His name," he said quietly, "is Elliot." The silence that followed felt endless. His mother stared at him, her expression shifting through confusion, realization, shock. "Elliot? Our neighbor Elliot? Yeah, you mean you and he are dating?" "Yes." Mason forced himself to hold her gaze, to not look away. "I'm gay, Mom. I've known for a while, but I was scared to tell you." His mother sat down heavily. Oh, Mason. I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything right now. I just needed you to know." "Does your father know?" "Not yet. I wanted to tell you first." She nodded slowly, still processing. "How long have you known?" "That I'm gay." "A while." "That I wanted to tell you?" "Since I met Elliot." "And you're sure? This isn't just experimenting or confusion?" "I'm sure, Mom. More sure than I've been about anything." His mother looked at him for a long moment, and Mason could see her struggling with this new information, trying to reconcile it with whatever image she'd had of his future. "I love you," she said finally. "That doesn't change. But I need some time to process this." "I understand." She reached across the table and took his hand. "Thank you for telling me. I know that couldn't have been easy." It wasn't the enthusiastic acceptance Mason had hoped for, but it also wasn't rejection. It was something in between, which he supposed was realistic. That evening, his mother asked to talk to him and his father together. Mason's stomach churned as they all sat down in the living room. "Mason has something he needs to tell you," his mother said to his father. His father looked between them, clearly confused. "What's going on?" Mason took a breath. "I'm gay, Dad, and I'm dating Elliot, our neighbor." His father's expression went blank, unreadable. For a long moment, he didn't say anything. Then, "I see. That's it?" Mason asked. "That's all you have to say?" "What do you want me to say?" "I don't know. Something. Anything." His father stood up and walked to the window, his back to them. "I need to think about this." "Richard," his mother said gently. "I said I need to think." His father's voice was sharp. Without another word, he left the room. Mason felt tears prick his eyes. His mother came over and hugged him. "Give him time," she said. "This is a lot for him to process." "Is it a lot to process that your son is happy? That he found someone who makes him feel good? It's a lot to process that your image of your child's future has to change. He'll come around. Just give him time." But as days passed, his father remained distant. He wasn't cruel, wasn't overtly rejecting, but there was a wall between them that hadn't been there before. He didn't ask about Elliot, didn't acknowledge that anything had changed, just continued on as if Mason had never said anything. It hurt, more than Mason had expected. Elliot held him while he cried about it, stroking his hair and murmuring reassurances. "It's not fair," Mason said. "I finally have the courage to be honest, and he can't even look at me. I know it's not fair." Elliot kissed his forehead. "But you did the right thing. You were brave and honest, and that matters regardless of how he reacts. Does it get easier? Than not having your family's full support?" "Eventually," Elliot said. "You learn to build your own family. People who choose to love you for exactly who you are." Mason clung to him, finding comfort in his solidity, his certainty. "You're my family now, and you're mine." They made love for the first time that night, slowly, carefully, learning each other's bodies, with the same attention they'd given to learning each other's minds. And afterward, lying tangled together in Elliot's blue-painted bedroom, Mason felt a peace he'd never known before. "I love you," he whispered into the darkness. Elliot's arms tightened around him. I love you too. So much it was fast, Mason knew. Too fast by conventional wisdom, but nothing about this felt conventional. It felt right. It felt like finally finding the missing piece he hadn't known he was looking for. The rest of the summer unfolded like a dream. Long lazy days spent together, exploring the city, finding their favorite spots. The hidden garden behind the library, where they could kiss without worrying about being seen. The vintage bookstore where they'd spend hours browsing, recommending books to each other. The late-night diner, where they'd go after midnight, talking about everything and nothing over terrible coffee and surprisingly good pie. Mason introduced Elliot to his friend Jordan, who was surprisingly supportive. Dude, I'm happy for you, Jordan said. You seem really good together. And they were good together. They fit in a way that felt effortless. Elliot challenged Mason creatively, encouraged his writing, listened to him read passages from his novel, and gave thoughtful feedback. Mason helped Elliot with design work sometimes, offering the outsider perspective that Elliot said was invaluable. But underneath the happiness, there was an expiration date looming. Summer was ending. Mason would go back to university in a few weeks, and Elliot still hadn't made a decision about staying or returning to Chicago. They didn't talk about it until they had to. It was 3 weeks before Mason was supposed to leave, when Elliot brought it up. My lease in Chicago is up at the end of the month, he said. They were lying in bed, the morning sun streaming through the windows. I need to decide if I'm renewing it or letting it go. Mason's heart clenched. What are you going to do? I don't know. Part of me wants to stay here, build a life in this city, with you. Elliot turned to look at him, but I'm also scared. Scared of making decisions based on a relationship that's still so new. Scared of what happens if things don't work out, and I've burned all my bridges back in Chicago. I understand, Mason said, even though it hurt. Do you? Because I feel like I'm asking you to wait for me to figure out my life, and that's not fair to you. I'm willing to wait. I'm willing to do long distance if that's what we need to do. I'm willing to figure it out. Mason propped himself up on his elbow. Elliot, I love you. That doesn't come with conditions or time. Whatever you decide, wherever you are, I want to make this work. Elliot pulled him down into a kiss. I don't deserve you. Yes, you do? They made love again, urgent and a little desperate, like they were trying to memorize each other through touch. Afterward, Elliot said, I'm going to let the Chicago apartment go. Mason's breath caught. Are you sure? I'm sure. I don't want to keep one foot out the door anymore. I want to be here, with you. Fully committed, no safety nets. What about your fear of commitment? Still there, Elliot admitted, but you're worth facing my fears for. Mason kissed him deeply, pouring all his love and gratitude and relief into it. I love you so much. I love you too. The weeks before Mason left for university passed too quickly. They spent every possible moment together, storing up memories like provisions for the separation ahead. Mason's father remained distant, but his mother tried to bridge the gap. She invited Elliot over for dinner one night in Olive Branch that Elliot accepted graciously. It was awkward at first, his father barely speaking, but by the end of the evening, there had been a slight thaw. Not acceptance, not yet, but at least acknowledgement. Thank you for being patient with him, Mason's mother said to Elliot as he was leaving. And thank you for making my son happy. He makes me happy too, Elliot said simply. The day before Mason was supposed to leave, they drove out to the lake. It was a beautiful late summer day, the water sparkling under the sun. Families scattered across the beach. They found a quiet spot away from the crowds and spread out a blanket. Elliot had packed the picnic sandwiches and fruit and the chocolate chip cookies that were Mason's favorite. I'm going to miss this, Mason said, lying back and looking up at the sky. Miss you? It's only a few hours' drive. I can visit on weekends. You can come home sometimes. Elliot lay down next to him, their fingers interlacing. We'll make it work. I know. I just wish we had more time. This summer went by so fast. Elliot turned on his side to look at him. We have all the time in the world. This isn't ending. It's just changing. Mason pulled him into a kiss, trying to memorize the taste of him, the feel of him. When they broke apart, both a little breathless, Elliot reached into his pocket. I got you something, he said, pulling out a small box. Inside was a simple silver bracelet, engraved with coordinates. It's the exact latitude and longitude of where we're sitting right now, Elliot explained. So no matter where you are, you can remember this moment. Remember us. Mason's eyes filled with tears. It's perfect. He let Elliot clasp it around his wrist, and then pulled him into another kiss. I have something for you too. He handed Elliot a leather-bound journal. I know you sketch sometimes, work out ideas on paper. I thought you could use this, and Mason opened to the first page, where he'd written a dedication. I wrote you something. Elliot read it aloud, his voice soft. You taught me that love doesn't have to be quiet or hidden or small. You taught me that I deserve to take up space, to want, to be wanted. You taught me that coming home to yourself is the bravest thing you can do. Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for staying. Thank you for being the person I didn't know I was looking for. All my love. When Elliot looked up, there were tears in his eyes too. Mason, this is... I don't even have words. You don't need words. Just keep it. Use it. Think of me. I think of you constantly, Elliot said. Even when you're right in front of me, I'm thinking about you. They spent the rest of the day at the lake, talking and kissing and soaking in each other's presence. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, Elliot said, I want you to know something. No matter what happens with school, with your family, with any of it time here, I'm committed to this. To us. Me too, Mason said. Completely. That night they stayed up until dawn, neither wanting to sleep, neither wanting to waste a single moment. They made love slowly, tenderly, like they were imprinting themselves on each other. And when the sun rose, they watched it together from Elliot's balcony, wrapped in blankets, drinking coffee, savoring the last hours. Mason's parents helped him pack up the car. His mother hugged him tightly, whispering, I'm proud of you, sweetheart, for being brave, for being yourself. His father stood back, but as Mason was getting into the car, he stepped forward. Drive safe, he said gruffly. Then, more quietly, we'll talk when you come home for Thanksgiving. It wasn't much, but it was something. Mason nodded, not trusting himself to speak. Elliot was waiting by his car. They'd said their private goodbyes earlier, but Mason needed one more moment. I love you, he said. I love you too. Now go, before I convince you to stay. Would that be so bad? Yes, because you need to finish your degree and become a famous author so I can say I knew you when. Elliot kissed him once more. Go, I'll call you tonight. The drive back to university felt surreal. Mason kept touching the bracelet on his wrist, grounding himself in the physical reminder of what he was leaving behind. But also, for the first time, he was excited to go back. Excited to be himself fully, without hiding. Excited to tell his friends about Elliot, to live openly. That evening, settled into his dorm room with his roommate gone for the night, Mason video called Elliot. Hey, Elliot said when his face appeared on screen. How was the drive? Long, but I'm here. Safe. Good. Elliot was in his bed, and Mason could see the blue walls of his bedroom behind him. I miss you already. Miss you too. This is going to be harder than I thought. Yeah, but we'll figure it out. Elliot smiled. Tell me about your room. Show me around. They talked for hours, until Mason's eyes were drooping and he could barely stay awake. But even then, he didn't want to hang up. Sleep, Elliot said gently. I'll still be here in the morning. Promise. Promise. I love you, Mason. I love you too. The first few weeks of the semester were an adjustment. Mason threw himself into his classes, into his writing, into building friendships with people who accepted him fully. He came out to his creative writing workshop on the first day when they were doing introductions, and the casual acceptance he received was liberating. He and Elliot talked every day, video calls at night, texts throughout the day, occasional surprise packages in the mail. Elliot sent him sketches and designs. Mason sent him pieces of writing, scenes from his novel that he was finally making real progress on. They visited each other when they could. Elliot drove up for a long weekend in September, and Mason showed him around campus, introduced him to his friends. They spent the nights in Mason's dorm room, trying to be quiet, laughing when they failed. I like this version of you, Elliot said, watching Mason interact with his classmates in the dining hall. You're more confident here, more yourself. I feel more myself, Mason admitted. But I miss you. I miss you too. But this is good for you, for both of us, learning to be ourselves separately so we can be better together. In October, Mason went home for a long weekend. Elliot picked him up from the bus station, and the reunion was emotional kissing in the parking lot, not caring who saw, just needing to touch each other. I have news, Elliot said when they finally pulled apart. Remember that big client I was working with? The rebrand. Yeah, they loved it so much they want to put me on retainer. Steady work, good money, enough that I can actually build something sustainable here. Elliot, that's amazing. It gets better. I signed a year lease on the apartment. I'm staying, officially. Mason kissed him again, deeper this time. I'm so proud of you. I'm proud of us, Elliot corrected, for making this work, for being brave. At home, things were slowly improving. Mason's mother was making an effort to ask about Elliot, to include him in conversation, and his father, while still not entirely comfortable, was at least present. At dinner that night, he asked Mason about his classes, about his writing. I'd like to read some of your work sometime, he said awkwardly. If you're willing to share. Mason felt tears prick his eyes. It was a small thing, but it meant everything. I'd like that, Dad. That night, lying in Elliot's bed, Mason said, I think it's going to be okay. With my family. It'll take time, but I think they're trying. I'm glad, Elliot said, running his fingers through Mason's hair. You deserve that. You deserve all the love and acceptance in the world. I have you. That's enough. You should have both. Your family and me. You shouldn't have to choose. Mason kissed him. I'm not choosing. I'm keeping both. Fighting for both. The rest of the year unfolded in a pattern of separation and reunion, of phone calls and visits, of learning to love each other across distance. It wasn't always easy. There were lonely nights and missed calls and frustrations, but there were also surprises, flowers delivered to Mason's dorm room, handwritten letters that arrived in the mail, playlists created and shared, and through it all, they grew. Mason finished his novel, tentatively sending it to agents. Elliot's business flourished, landing more clients, building a reputation. They both learned to be whole people independently, which made their time together even richer. When summer came around again, Mason came home not to a temporary visit, but to stay for the break. The first morning back, he woke early and looked out his window at Elliot's balcony. Elliot was there, doing his morning yoga, and when he looked up and saw Mason, his face split into a huge smile. He waved, and Mason waved back. Some things never changed. Mason got dressed quickly and ran over, letting himself in with the key Elliot had given him. He found Elliot in the kitchen making coffee, and immediately wrapped his arms around him from behind. Good morning, Elliot murmured, turning in his arms to kiss him properly. Welcome home. Missed you so much. Missed you too, but we have all summer now. 3 whole months. They spent that summer building on what they'd started the year before. Mason wrote every morning while Elliot worked on designs. In the afternoons, they'd explore the city, finding new favorite places, building a life together. Evenings were for cooking and talking and loving each other. Mason's father slowly warmed up. By July, he was actually joking with Elliot, asking his opinion on projects, treating him like a member of the family. One night, after a backyard barbecue, he pulled Mason aside. "I'm sorry," he said gruffly, "for how I reacted when you told me, for not being supportive." "Dad, let me finish. I was scared. Scared for you, scared of what people would think, scared of losing the image I had of your future. But I was wrong. You're happy. You found someone good. That should have been all that mattered from the start." Mason hugged him, and his father hugged back tightly. "I love you, son. I'm proud of you. I love you too, Dad." As summer ended and it was time to go back for sophomore year, Mason felt different than he had the year before. There was sadness at leaving Elliot, yes, but also confidence. They'd proven they could make this work. They'd built something real and lasting. "One more year," Elliot said, as they said goodbye. "Then you graduate, and we can figure out what's next." "I can't wait," Mason said. "For all of it. For our future." "Me neither." Elliot kissed him softly. "I love you, Mason. Thank you for being brave enough to love me back." "Always," Mason promised. "Always." As Mason drove back to university, he looked at the bracelet on his wrist. The coordinates that marked where they'd promised each other forever. He touched it, feeling the cool metal against his skin, and smiled. He'd started the summer watching a beautiful stranger through his window, afraid to want, afraid to be seen. He'd ended it with a love that was real, and open, and unashamed. He'd found himself in finding Elliot, and in doing so, he'd found home, not the house he'd grown up in, not the university where he was building his future, but in the space between, in the connection they'd built, in the love they shared, in the courage it took to be honest about who he was. The road ahead was long and uncertain, but for the first time in his life, Mason wasn't afraid of it. Because whatever came next, he wouldn't face it alone. He had Elliot. He had himself. And that was more than enough.